You know that feeling when someone you love is slowly disappearing right in front of you, and the people who should care the most just look away? That's exactly what happened to my grandpa, Thomas Hale. And it still hurts every single time I think about it. Let me take you back to the beginning, the way it really started. I was maybe 8 years old the first time I really noticed him. Grandpa lived in this tiny gray house at the end of Maple Lane. The paint was peeling, the porch steps creaked, and the front yard had more dandelions than grass. But to me that house felt like magic. Because inside it lived the calmest, kindest man I'd ever known. That he never raised his voice, never bragged, never even talked much about his past. He'd sit on that old wooden porch swing every evening, wearing the same faded blue flannel shirt, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug that said, U.S. Navy in letters so worn you could barely read them. I'd run up the steps after school, and he'd smile that slow, gentle smile and say, "There's my favorite visitor." That was it. No big hugs, no loud stories. Just quiet love. Why parents? They barely came. Dad, his only son, would drive by once every few weeks, honk the horn, wave from the car, and keep going. Mom always had an excuse. We're busy with the mortgage, the new car payment, your sister's soccer practice. I heard those lines so many times they started to feel like a script. Grandpa never complained. He'd just watch their car disappear down the street, then turn to me with soft eyes and say, "They've got their own lives, kiddo. That's how it should be." But I saw what they couldn't see. I saw the way his hands trembled when he tried to open a jar. I saw the way he winced when he stood up too fast. I saw the way he stared at old photographs when he thought no one was looking, black and white pictures of young men in uniform standing on a ship deck, laughing. He never explained who those men were. One afternoon when I was 12, I found something strange in his drawer while he was napping. A small silver ring. Simple band, but on the inside there was a tiny engraving, an anchor and the letters Silent Tom. I asked him about it later. He just smiled and said, "Old Navy thing. Don't worry about it." Then he slipped it on his right hand and never took it off again. That ring became part of him. I didn't know then that it was about to become the most important object in our entire family story. As the years rolled on, Grandpa got older. His hair turned from salt and pepper to pure white. His shoulders, once broad from years of hard work, started to round forward. The doctors said it was just age. Arthritis. High blood pressure. Nothing serious, they claimed. But I knew better. I saw the way he needed 2 hands to lift a coffee cup by the time I turned 15. Still, my parents stayed distant. Dad would call once a month. "How you doin', Pop?" Grandpa would answer in that steady voice, "Can't complain." And that was the end of the conversation. No visites. No offers to help with groceries. No, "Hey, why don't you come stay with us for a while?" Nothing. I started staying over more often. I'd sleep on the old couch in the living room so I could hear if he got up in the night. Sometimes he'd wake up coughing, and I'd bring him water. He'd pat my hand and whisper, "You're a good kid. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." One night he told me something I'll never forget. The house was dark except for the blue glow of the television. He was watching an old war movie and suddenly he said real quiet, "I was there once. Not the movies. The real thing." I asked what he meant. He just shook his head. Some stories are better left in the past. I didn't push. I wish I had. That was the first crack in the wall. The first time I felt something wasn't right about the way our family treated him. But I was still a teenager. I told myself maybe I was imagining things. Maybe parents just get busy. Maybe Grandpa liked being alone. I was wrong. So very wrong. By the time I turned 18, Grandpa's health had started sliding downhill fast. The doctors finally gave it a name: prostate cancer stage 3. They said it had been growing for years. Years. That meant while my parents were buying new furniture and planning vacations, Grandpa had been quietly fighting something deadly inside his own body. Alone. I begged them. I literally sat at our kitchen table and cried in front of both of them. "He needs us. He can't live by himself anymore. Please, let's bring him here." Mom looked at Dad. Dad looked at the floor. Then he said the words that still echo in my head. We don't have the space. And honestly, he's always been independent. He wouldn't want to be a burden. Burden. That word hit me like a slap. Grandpa never once called himself a burden. Not even when he could barely walk to the bathroom without holding onto walls. Instead, he started refusing my help. You've got college to think about, he'd say. Don't waste your time on an old man. So I did the only thing I could. I drove over every single day after my classes. I cooked simple meals, soup, mashed potatoes, anything soft. I helped him shower. I made sure his medications were taken on time. And every night I'd sit on the edge of his bed and just talk. About my day. About stupid college drama. About anything. He'd listen like every word mattered. My parents visited exactly twice during the entire 6 months his condition worsened. Twice. Once they brought a casserole that sat in the fridge until it went bad. The second time Dad handed him a $50 bill like that was somehow enough. Grandpa thanked them with that same gentle smile. I wanted to scream. One afternoon I overheard them in the hallway, while they thought I was outside. Mom said, "He's got his pension. He can hire a nurse." Dad answered, "Exactly. We've done enough. Done enough." I stood there frozen, tears burning my eyes. My own parents, his own son and daughter-in-law, had decided their father was someone else's problem. The cancer spread. To his bones. To his lungs. The pain got so bad he couldn't hide it anymore. Some nights he gripped my hand so tight I thought he might break my fingers, but he never made a sound. Never complained. He'd just whisper, "Thank you for being here." Then came the night everything changed. It was 2:17 a.m. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered half asleep. A nurse's voice. "Is this the granddaughter of Thomas Hale? He's been rushed to Mercy General. He's asking for family." I threw on clothes and drove like the devil was behind me. When I got to the hospital, Grandpa was already in a room. Oxygen mask on, monitors beeping. He looked so small. So fragile. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Where's your father?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I lied. "They're on their way." They weren't. I called them 6 times. No answer. Texted. No reply. Grandpa held my hand all night. He talked about the old days, fishing trips we never actually took, but he made them sound real. He talked about how proud he was of me. He never once said a bad word about my parents. Even then, at 3:42 a.m., he squeezed my hand one last time, smiled and said, "You're gonna do great things, kiddo." Then he closed his eyes and didn't open them again. He died with only me in the room. The hospital called my parents at 4:15 a.m. They showed up at 9:30. Mom's eyes were red like she'd been crying. Dad kept saying, "We got here as fast as we could." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? The funeral was 3 days later. Smallest service I've ever seen. 27 people total. Mostly neighbors and a couple of old veterans who somehow heard about it. No military honor guard. No flag on the casket. Grandpa had never told anyone he was anything special. I stood at the front of the chapel holding that silver ring in my pocket. I had taken it off his finger before they took him away. It felt warm, like it still carried his heartbeat. Dad gave a short speech. Talked about how Grandpa was a good man and served his country. He didn't even know what branch. He said Army at one point. I had to correct him quietly. Navy. After the service, people came up to me. An old man in a wheelchair grabbed my arm and said, "Your grandpa saved my life in '68. Never told you that, did he?" I shook my head. He just nodded sadly and wheeled away. That was the first time I realized there was a whole other life Grandpa had lived that none of us knew. My parents left right after the burial. They had a work thing. I stayed until the last person left. Then I sat on the grass beside the fresh grave and cried until I had nothing left. I made a promise that day. I was going to find out who Thomas Hale really was. And I was going to make sure the world knew, even if his own children never cared enough to ask. Section 4. The secret I uncovered almost equals 3,500 words, 23 minutes. For the next 2 years I became obsessed. I spent nights digging through old military records online. I wrote letters to the Department of Veterans Affairs. I tracked down men who served with him. Slowly, piece by piece, the picture came together to why Grandpa wasn't just Navy. He was a Navy SEAL. One of the very first Vietnam classified missions that never made the news. They called him Silent Tom because he could move through the jungle like a ghost. He pulled entire squads out of ambushes no one else could have survived. He took shrapnel 3 different times and still went back. Point 1 story hit me hardest. In 1968, during the Tet Offensive, his team was pinned down. Everyone else was wounded. Grandpa crawled through enemy fire for 6 hours, dragging men to safety one by one. The last man he saved was a young lieutenant who later became a general. That lieutenant wrote in his report, "I owe my life to Petty Officer Thomas Hale. He is the bravest man I have ever known." And yet my grandpa never claimed a single medal. Never talked about it. Never asked for anything. He came home, got a quiet job fixing cars, raised my dad, and faded into the background. Why? Because he believed real heroes don't need recognition. The more I learned, the angrier I got at my parents. They had lived their entire lives in the shadow of a giant, and never once bothered to look up. I started planning something. Not revenge in the angry, loud way. Quiet revenge. The kind that honors him instead of hurting them. I found out about an annual Veterans Recognition ceremony held by the state every October. It was invitation only, but I wrote a long letter explaining who my grandpa was and attached every document I could find. 3 weeks later I got the email. We would be honored to recognize Petty Officer Thomas Hale. I didn't tell my parents. I wanted them to find out the hard way. October 12th. The ceremony was held in a big auditorium at the state capitol. Hundreds of people. Veterans in wheelchairs, families, news cameras. I wore the only black suit I owned and pinned Grandpa's silver ring to the inside of my jacket, right over my heart. They had a section where family members could speak briefly about their loved ones. When my turn came, I walked up to the microphone with shaking hands. I told them the simple truth. My grandpa died alone because his own family didn't have time for him. But he was so much more than we ever knew. I showed the ring on the big screen behind me, the engraving, the anchor. And then it happened. A tall man in full dress uniform stood up in the front row. 4-star general. Everyone went quiet. He walked straight up to the stage, eyes locked on that ring. His face went white. "May I?" he asked, voice thick. I handed him the ring. He turned it over in his hands and I watched tears, actual tears, fill the eyes of a man who had commanded thousands. "Silent Tom," he whispered. "My God, it's really you." The entire room leaned forward. The general took the microphone from me and told the story I had only read in documents. How Grandpa had carried him on his back through a burning jungle while bullets flew. How he refused the Medal of Honor because I was just doing my job. How he disappeared after the war and no one could find him. "He saved my life," the general said, voice breaking. "And I never got to thank him. Then he did something I will remember until the day I die." He saluted the giant photo of Grandpa on the screen. Perfect, slow military salute. Every single person in that auditorium stood up and saluted with him. The cameras flashed. The applause lasted almost 10 minutes. I stood there crying, holding that ring, finally feeling like someone had seen him. Section 6. The aftermath and the truth almost equals 2,847 words, 19 minutes. The video of the ceremony went viral overnight. Millions of views. News stations called. My phone exploded with messages. My parents were among them. Dad called at 6 a.m. the next morning. Voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell us?" I answered calmly. "You never asked." Mom cried on the phone. Said they felt terrible. Said they wanted to make it right. But it was too late. Grandpa was gone. The only thing left was the truth they had ignored for decades. They tried to come over. I met them at the door and simply said, "He died alone. You made that choice. Now the world knows who he really was." I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I just closed it quietly. The ring sits on my desk now in a small glass case. Every morning I look at it and remember. Grandpa taught me that real strength is quiet, that love doesn't need applause, and that sometimes the deepest betrayal comes from the people who share your blood. But he also taught me that truth has a way of finding the light, even if it takes years. Even if it takes a general recognizing a simple silver ring does. So if you're watching this and you have an elderly parent or grandparent, go see them today. Ask them their stories. Hold their hand while you still can. Because one day that hand will be gone, and all you'll have left is regret, or the beautiful memory of having been there. My grandpa died alone. But because of that ring, he didn't stay forgotten. And that, in the end, is the only revenge that ever mattered. Thank you for listening to his story. If this moved you, drop a comment with the name of someone you're going to call today. I read every single one. And if you're new here, subscribe. More real stories of betrayal, justice, and quiet heroes coming every week.